Mr. Askola, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
The Biden administration allowed Ukraine to use American long-distance missiles to strike targets in Russia. Is this decision too little, too late?
The decision is a little bit too little and too late, but it's still positive for Ukraine mostly, and this is for a few reasons that I will tell you. First of all, the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia are about to start, and right now Russia does not really have any incentive to negotiate or to compromise because Russia is convinced that its situation on the front will improve over time. So Russia is convinced also that their negotiation situation will improve and that they will get a better deal in the future. And because of this lifting of restriction gives Russia an incentive to negotiate, but also to compromise, and gives Ukraine some leverage. Second, Russia has started its winter campaign by striking Ukraine and its civilian infrastructure during last weekend, as we saw, and this gives Ukraine a bit of a deterrence and a capacity to strike back. And finally, the official reason why this was done was Russia using North Korean troops. And it's important for Ukraine's allies to show Russia and North Korea that when they escalate, this does not come without consequences. So these are the good sides about it, but there are also some question marks and some downsides. One of them being that obviously it's too little, too late. Also, it's limited geographically. So far, it seems that it's only limited to Kursk Oblast, even if originally we thought that it would be the whole area, but it's only in Kursk Oblast. And then Ukraine does not have high amounts of ATACMS missiles. So the US will also need to give the permission to use other missiles. France and the UK, for example, have allowed Storm Shadow missiles to be used, but the US needs to accept it for it to happen. And the US should send some JASM missiles, for example, so that Ukraine would have more missiles to strike with. And then finally, the last downside is that, again, this was leaked to the press before it actually happened, which gives Russia an opportunity to move equipment away from areas close to the border. So this was, again, a wasted opportunity to destroy some key equipment. And that is always sad, but it's part of this escalation strategy by the Biden administration. But escalation management, I mean. But anyways, overall, it's too little and too late, but it is better than nothing for Ukraine.
The eventual use of missiles make relations worse between Ukraine and the new elected President Trump due to his efforts to solve war as soon as possible.
Trump and his supporters are using this as something to attack the Biden administration. But it's good to remember that these missiles are not a game changer in the sense that Ukraine has been using drones and missiles on Russian territory since the beginning of the war. This is just one more missile that can be used on the territory, and it has a very limited use. It gives Ukraine, again, some leverage and Russia some incentive to negotiate. So Trump might be mad about it, and the people around him have criticized this decision, but it's actually a very good thing because it improves the chances of negotiations bringing peace one day, even if it's unlikely that the negotiations will bring peace right away. But at some point, this increases the chance of peace happening because it gives Russia a bigger incentive to negotiate and compromise.
And Biden has 2 more months in the White House before Trump takes over. Is Europe ready to take on the burden of supplying Ukraine if the US does not want it anymore?
The Trump election is, of course, a big headache for Europe in many ways, but it's an opportunity for Europe to wake up and step up. If Europe doesn't wake up now, it never will. Europe is not fully ready, but Europe is much more ready than what most people understand and more ready than it was before the full-scale invasion. In Europe, it's usually not a question of lack of resources, but more a question of lack of unity in decision-making and complex decision-making processes that make it difficult. Europe should not wait for the negotiations to happen to make moves because these first negotiations are quite likely to fail or at least not to bring peace in the short term. And Europe needs to be ready for that. Europe has actually already given more aid to Ukraine than the US. And Europe just needs to feel the difference if the US stops. So again, as you said, it's possible that Trump will tell Europe that if negotiations fail, now it's your turn. You can do whatever you want. And Europe, in that case, will need to increase military aid and also increase financial aid. And for military aid, there are options to do it. We can increase our own production, which needs to increase more, but it has already increased a bit. We can buy equipment from outside the EU, like we did with the Czech initiative, with the shells. And we can also place orders to the Ukrainian industry, which is not at full capacity, but is formidable as well and has increased a lot. And in terms of financing it, we have several options. We can use common debt, we can use frozen assets. And if those are too complex in terms of the political process, if Hungary blocks it, for example, then we can do it bilaterally like we've done before. A lot of little countries, smaller countries in Europe that have had tensions with Russia before have understood the seriousness of the situation for a long time, but the key here will be the bigger countries. So France, Germany, and the UK, those will be and maybe Italy as well, those will be the key countries to convince. But to conclude, Europe does not lack resources. What Europe lacks is motivation, especially among the big countries, and the decision making is complex in Europe. But we have the capacity to do it if we want to.
Snap elections in Germany approaching. The main candidate for the future chancellor is Friedrich Merz from the CDU. He has a favorable attitude towards Ukraine. Could the Macron-Merz access replace possible US retreat in case of Ukraine?
Good question. Thank you. If Merz becomes the chancellor, that would be very good for Ukraine because he's much better for Ukraine than Scholz, as many know. And Scholz proved again with his phone call to Vladimir Putin, which was done for political purposes for himself. In a selfish way, he proved that he's not the right man for this job. And Merz has a much better attitude. He has said that, for example, if he would become the chancellor, he would give an ultimatum to Russia, a 24-hour ultimatum where if they don't agree to peace, then Germany will send Taurus missiles. And of course, that isn't a game changer, but that shows a different attitude compared to Scholz. The issue in Merz is that the CDU and CSU right now are at around maybe 32% in most polls, somewhere like that. And 32 is high, but it's not enough to make a coalition on your own. They will need a coalition partner or junior partner, or they will need some alliances to do so. And the parties that are in the coalition right now, most of them are not doing very well in the polls. So, for example, none of them are likely to be enough alone as a partner. So the AfD is second, and AfD has 19% in the polls, and they are against aid to Ukraine, and they are rather pro-Russia, and that would be bad. So there will be a complex process to actually build a coalition with Merz as the leader. But if they manage to build one, and if Merz becomes the leader, then in that case, this Merz-Macron axis that you talked about would be much better than the current Scholz-Macron axis. And as I said in the previous question, Europe has the resources. Europe is much stronger economically than Russia, and Europe can take care of Ukraine without problem. The issue is the decision-making processes and the motivation, especially among the bigger countries who need to step up and do much more. But with the right attitude and the right people, with Merz and Macron, Europe has the capacity, if it wants to replace the US aid. And there are many ways to do it. As I said, we can buy equipment from outside the EU if needed. We have no excuses. It's just a question of motivation.